The rain had already turned the city into a blur of silver lights and restless reflections when Serafina Vale stepped out of her black car, unaware that this evening would quietly fracture everything she believed about success, loneliness, and love. She was known across continents as the billionaire CEO who rebuilt collapsing companies in months, the woman whose decisions moved markets before breakfast, and yet on that particular night, standing outside a modest restaurant chosen for a blind date she barely agreed to attend, she felt something unfamiliar tightening inside her chest, not fear, but anticipation she could not calculate or control. If you believe in unexpected encounters that change lives forever, take a moment to like this story, share it, and subscribe to Kindness Hub, because stories like this remind us that second chances often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. Serafina had not planned for romance. Her life was built on precision, schedules, and glass towers that reflected nothing but ambition. But her closest friend had insisted she meet someone who, unlike the polished executives she usually encountered, lived a life rooted in something real. That was how she ended up here, in a quiet restaurant far from the glittering corporate districts, unaware that on the other side of the city, another life was also being rearranged by fate. Merrick Collins arrived late, not because he was careless, but because life as a single father rarely obeyed schedules. He stepped out of a worn taxi holding the hands of 3 small boys, each of them dressed carefully but imperfectly, their hair still damp from a rushed attempt to look presentable. Merrick's face carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had learned to carry the world without asking for help. His life had once been different, but loss had narrowed it into something simpler and heavier, built entirely around the laughter and needs of his children. Inside the restaurant, Serafina was already seated, her posture composed, her expression calm, her mind preparing to politely endure an hour she expected to forget. But when Merrick entered, something disrupted that expectation immediately. It wasn't his appearance alone, though he lacked the polished edge of the men she usually met. It was the 3 boys at his side, holding tightly to his sleeves, scanning the room with wide, curious eyes that seemed untouched by the weight their father carried. The host hesitated, clearly unsure whether a reservation for 2 had quietly transformed into 5. Merrick explained gently that arrangements had changed unexpectedly during the day and that he couldn't leave his sons alone. There was no apology in his voice, only quiet truth. Serafina watched from her table as the situation unfolded, noticing how the children stayed close to him as if he were their anchor in a world that often drifted too fast. Something in her shifted, subtle but undeniable. She did not know yet that this was the beginning of a story that would unravel her entire definition of success. Before the evening continued, pause for a moment, and if this story is already touching your heart, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Hub. Your support helps bring more emotional stories of hope and second chances to life. The restaurant manager tried to suggest a rearrangement, perhaps another table, perhaps another time, but Serafina surprised everyone by insisting they all stay. She did not fully understand why she said it. It was unlike her to adjust her world for anyone else. Yet something about the boys, especially the smallest one clutching a worn toy car, made her decision feel less like generosity and more like instinct. As the evening unfolded, Serafina found herself observing rather than participating. Merrick did not perform or impress. He simply managed, gently redirecting his children when they became restless, quietly helping them navigate menus, patiently answering their endless questions about everything from ceiling lights to dessert choices. There was no attempt to hide the difficulty of his situation. Instead, there was dignity in how he carried it. Serafina, who had built her empire on control, began to notice how fragile control really was. Outside the restaurant windows, the rain deepened, tracing long lines down the glass like passing time. Inside, something far more delicate was forming. The children, initially shy around her expensive watch and composed silence, slowly warmed when she responded to their innocent questions without condescension. One of them asked why she looked so serious all the time, and though she did not answer directly, something softened in her expression that even she did not recognize. Merrick watched quietly, not with calculation, but with curiosity. He had expected judgment, perhaps discomfort, from a woman who looked like she belonged in another world entirely. Instead, he saw something unexpected in her restraint. She was not distant because she lacked feeling, but because she had learned to hide it well. The conversation, though light on words, became heavy with unspoken understanding. By the time food arrived, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The boys laughed more freely, one of them accidentally knocking over a glass of water, apologizing with panic until Serafina calmly helped clean it without a trace of irritation. Merrick noticed how differently she handled imperfection. In his world, imperfection was constant. In hers, it seemed almost forbidden. Yet here she was, unbothered by chaos she could not monetize or control. Something inside Serafina, long suppressed, began to surface. Memories of a childhood where warmth had existed before responsibility swallowed it whole flickered briefly, uninvited. She had built walls so high that even she forgot what they were meant to protect. As the evening deepened, Merrick eventually shared fragments of his life without dramatizing them. A small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Long nights balancing work and parenting. Dreams postponed indefinitely. He did not seek sympathy. He spoke as someone who had accepted reality without surrendering hope. The boys, meanwhile, occasionally interrupted with innocent observations that made even Serafina smile despite herself. For the first time in years, she felt something she could not schedule or suppress. Presence. Outside, the storm eased into a quiet drizzle. Inside, the blind date that was supposed to be a brief, forgettable encounter was becoming something neither of them had planned for. Serafina began to realize that Merrick was not trying to impress her. He was simply living, fully and imperfectly, with everything he had left. And in that honesty, there was a strength she had never seen in boardrooms or executive meetings. The evening ended without grand declarations. Merrick prepared to leave with his children, careful not to overstay what he assumed was a polite misunderstanding. Serafina, however, found herself reluctant to let the moment dissolve so easily. Not because of attraction alone, but because something about their encounter had unsettled the foundation she had built her life upon. She watched them step into the night, the three boys laughing softly at something their father said, unaware of how profoundly their brief presence had shifted a billionaire's carefully structured world. What Serafina did not yet understand was that this was only the beginning of a series of choices that would force her to confront everything she had avoided for years: loneliness disguised as success, strength mistaken for isolation, and the possibility that real wealth might have nothing to do with numbers at all. Days passed, but the memory did not fade. She found herself thinking about the smallest boy's laughter, the way Merrick carried responsibility without complaint, and the strange peace she felt in a room that had nothing to offer her ambition. Meetings became distractions. Skyscrapers felt colder. Even success tasted slightly different, as if she had suddenly become aware of an ingredient she had been missing all along. Eventually, curiosity turned into intention. She asked her assistant to find information about Merrick Collins, not knowing why she needed to know more, only that she did. What she learned was simple and humbling. A man who had once been a technician in a mid-level firm. A sudden loss that changed everything. A life rebuilt not with ambition, but with necessity and love, and three boys who had become his entire world. The realization did not romanticize him in her mind. Instead, it grounded him further. He was not extraordinary in the way her world defined it. He was something rarer. He was consistent. When Serafina finally chose to see him again, it was not in a restaurant arranged by chance, but in a public park where children ran freely and life felt less curated. Merrick was surprised but not resistant. The boys remembered her instantly, approaching without hesitation, as if instinctively recognizing that she was no longer just a stranger from an expensive table. What followed was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual unfolding. Serafina began to understand what it meant to be part of something that did not require ownership or control. She learned how laughter could interrupt silence without breaking it. She learned how care could exist without transaction. And slowly, without realizing it, she began to unlearn the loneliness she had mistaken for independence. Merrick, too, found something he had not allowed himself to imagine again. Not rescue, not replacement, but companionship that did not demand perfection from his broken edges. And the boys, they simply learned that kindness sometimes arrives quietly, without announcement, and stays longer than expected. If this story has touched something inside you, take a moment to comment below and share what part stayed with you the most. Your thoughts matter more than you know. As months passed, their lives did not merge in dramatic fashion. Instead, they intertwined through small, steady moments that slowly redefined what family could mean. Serafina still led her company, but she no longer led it from a place of isolation. Merrick still faced daily struggles, but he no longer carried them entirely alone, and somewhere between a blind date that was never meant to matter and 3 small boys who changed everything without trying, a billionaire CEO discovered something no acquisition or empire could ever provide. A life that finally felt human. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Hub. It helps keep stories of hope, kindness, and second chances alive for others who need them too.